Elliot Smalley is the superintendent of the South Carolina Public Charter Schools, and he's also one of the panelists for tomorrow's Charleston Form at the Charleston Music Hall. I sit down one-on-one with Elliot for a special edition of Quintin's Close-Ups. And be sure to download the free Quintin's Close-Ups app in your Apple or Google Play stores, or listen to this interview later on the free iHeartRadio app. Elliot Smalley, it's so good to meet you.
That's great to meet you too.
I appreciate this. I understand that you are obviously the superintendent for South Carolina Public Charter School System, the district that is. What is it like for you to be a superintendent these days?
It's an incredible privilege. It's very energizing to have the opportunity to work with educators, school leaders, community leaders across the state of South Carolina and to impact children's lives. We have students from every single county in the state of South Carolina, and so just a chance to get up every day and do that is tremendous. So yeah, hard charging. We run at full speed every day for students and for families, and it's a huge opportunity and privilege for me to do that.
That is so good to hear. Let me turn to the community.
Yes.
Obviously this is the big talk around town right now, and you said this on your Twitter page, quote, and this is from the Post and Courier. It's official. Charleston apologizes for its role in slavery. When you think of Charleston and slavery, what sticks out in your mind?
There are a few things. So I think Charleston, and I'm a Charleston native, I was born here, and so while I'm the superintendent of a statewide district, I live in Charleston. My kids go to school in Charleston, and I'm a former administrator here. So I worked for 4.5 years for the Charleston County School District right here on Calhoun Street. And so Charleston is near and dear. And so when I saw that apology, and I think about slavery, and I think about our history here, particularly as a white male, I think about my responsibility to address the injustices that are both historic and current. And I think in many ways, when you look at how we're educating students still today, you see the impacts of slavery, you see the impacts of that institution still today, and the way that we educate in ways that are inequitable. And so I don't think that that's any accident, and I think that that is really tied to our history and sort of what we believe and the power structures in our society, in particular here in Charleston. And I think it's something we need to urgently not just talk about, but do something about.
And you talk about, obviously, the education, and obviously you talk about slavery as well. I want to take you to your tweet from early this morning. It reads this: 8th grade ELA in my hometown of Charleston. The far right is the percentage of kids meeting/exceeding. The far left is, percentage not meeting. Every child is born with potential for greatness. By 8th grade, look what we've done. Number 1, race matters. Number 2, this is an adult issue. Number 3, we can change this. So what more matters do we have to deal with as adults?
I think, one, we just need to come to grips with the fact that, well, let me start with this.
Okay.
An inherent belief that every single child is born with the potential to succeed in school and in life. We just, starting with that fundamental belief in equality and the same potential in every human being that's born, regardless his or her skin color. And so I think if we start there, and then we add to that a belief that educators can make a difference, that teachers wield through what they choose and the content that kids access and the level of expectation in the classroom that they bring and their expertise in teaching, that teachers in schools can make a huge difference. I would say the most important difference in unlocking that potential of every child. And so then if you take those two beliefs, one, that every child is inherently imbued with the same potential to achieve greatness, and number 2, that schools have the potential to unlock that greatness and the responsibility to do that. Then when you look at the data, and the data shows that by 8th grade, I mean, look at those numbers in that tweet. Those numbers are student lives, right? So by 8th grade, think about this. 16% of the black students in Charleston County are on grade level in ELA. That means 16% can read and write on grade level, essentially. 66% of the white students are on grade level in 8th grade. So by 8th grade, we have a 50-point gap. An order of magnitude of, what, 3 or 4 times more white students are on grade level than are black students. And so I would just submit, having been in many, many classrooms and in many schools where the opposite is true, where black students exceed the average, where black students achieve great levels of learning, and go on to greatness in life and in an education. I've seen that. I've seen it multiple times. And so we have these proof points and we know it's possible. And so there's something about the system and how we're operating that is producing these results for kids. And that is, as I said in this tweet, that's an adult issue. It's not a kid issue.
I hate to ask a stupid question.
Please.
But what is the state of education right now when you think of Charleston County?
Yeah, well, I think it's important to take a step back and say, if we look at our state, there were some recent reports put out. So within this past year, U.S. News and World Report did its first ever education rankings of states. We were ranked 50th out of all 50 states in education. And this is a study that looked at more than a dozen different measures and indicators. So it was really well done and comprehensive. We were ranked 50th. There is something called NAEP, the National Assessment of Educational Progress.
Right. And
every state, 4th and 8th graders and 12th graders take these tests, and they've been around for decades. And when you looked at that, we were 47th. This just came out a couple months ago, 47th, I think, in 4th grade. The achievement gaps between black and white students were the same in 2017 as they were in 1998. So this is kind of how we're doing as a state. We are really far behind and have a lot of work to do relative to other states nationally, and even other southern states with higher poverty rates. And so that's no excuse. So you have that, and then you look at Charleston. What's really remarkable about Charleston is, and I looked at this data when I was administrator, if you're a white student in Charleston, you actually do far better than your white peers in South Carolina. So when you look at our outcomes here in Charleston for white students, they're doing better than their peers. But for black students, they're doing worse. And so you think about all the talk about the Abbeville districts, the plaintiff districts, the urgent need for equity in funding the state of education in South Carolina, and you look at Charleston as sort of this crown jewel city that's on the cover of, Condé Nast and all these magazines, and we're world class. And yet, if you look really closely at the outcomes that we are producing for students of color, we are doing worse than the state of South Carolina. And to me, that just signals an urgent need to have a conversation about what we need to do to change that. And we have the potential to do it, that's for sure.
You talk about conversation. Let me take you back down to Calhoun Street. Obviously, we've just commemorated the 3-year anniversary of the Melvin Emanuel tragedy. And on your Twitter page, you said this quote, "Let us not forget, 3 years ago today, Melvin Emanuel, 9 souls gunned down by a young white man, so graciously invited into their Bible study. Keep up the fight for racial equality. My white friends and colleagues, confront, reject, and stamp out centuries-old anti-black racism." Where are you still emotionally 3 years later?
I was in Tennessee. I had moved to Tennessee for a few years, was working in Memphis and in Nashville, and I moved back like a week after the Emanuel AME tragedy. And one of the first things I did was actually go to church that Sunday, and I went with my mom and my daughter. And I remember just the cathartic, sort of emotional feeling of being in Mother Emanuel for a Sunday service, and also just the feeling of the city, the feeling of the street, the feeling all around the church at that time.
Right.
And although I wasn't here for the walk across the bridge,
right,
I saw the images, and we had a city that was like literally holding hands and circling up and saying, what is it that we need to do about this? And I feel like that reflects the spirit of Charleston and its people, and a willingness to do something to change our, frankly, ugly history when it comes to race. And I think, looking at it now 3 years later, my fear is that things have kind of quieted down. I'm really excited that we're having the forum this week to kind of reset on this and resurface this conversation about race. And what I'd really love to do is, with the privileges that I have as a white male who's from the South, who's from Charleston, which gives me access and gives me a platform, is to take responsibility, myself personally, for my connection to the inequity that we have here racially, and to leverage every opportunity I have to both talk about it, which I think is part of the solution, is to talk about this, is to confront it when you hear it, when you hear comments. I mean, if I told you all the comments that I heard about black students when I was in CCSD, made by colleagues, made by white administrators, and you see people hear that and just brush it off and not confront it in the moment. we have an opportunity when we get together as educators to look at our data and say, hey, what's happening here? If you control for poverty, we still have gaps in learning that are defined just by race, even when we control for poverty. When I was here, we did an analysis. Middle class black students did worse than white students on free and reduced lunch. And so when we have these conversations, a lot of times you'll notice that people will they'll just bring poverty right in and say, well, we have a poverty issue. And there's no question that we have a poverty issue. And we have a race issue. And we need to really zero in on that and talk about what that means, what implicit bias means as white educators and teachers, what it means, how it translates into what we expect of students, and the choices we make about what students can access. And if you go into classrooms, this will look like black students having access to materials and curriculum and content that's far below what they can do. That's far below their grade level. And if that happens every day, then by 3rd grade, you see huge achievement gaps. By 8th grade, we said it, 66% compared to 16%. And we can change that. We can change that in the expectations we bring every day. We can change it in the level of rigor and expectation that we bring and what students can access. And so we know it's totally doable. And I just really want to push on what I can do to help see that through and make that happen.
And that brings me to the Charleston Form, which will happen tomorrow night at the Music Hall. I just walked past it on my way over here. Obviously, you're one of the panelists, and you're going to give your, obviously, take on education and racism and whatnot. But what type of conversations do you want to hear from the other panelists?
Ownership. I think particularly if it's a white panelist, I want to hear ownership around our shared history and what we need to do about that and what in the present day needs to happen and how we can leverage our power and access to do something for students of color. I want to hear that. I want to hear solutions. I want to hear candor. I think we just need to keep it real about race and not mask it. You know, we're a super polite society here in Charleston. That's our nature. And so it's difficult to confront the issue and people feel attacked, and that's kind of a natural reaction. And I want to say, like, there's a lot of hope around this. And we should really talk about it in a hopeful way. But in order for that hope to sort of bear fruit for students, I think we also need to be realistic, and we need to confront the brutal realities, so to speak. And so confronting those brutal realities with real honesty, I think, is so critical. And to not take it personally, but to say, this is our truth. We can see it in the data. We know it's not the kids' fault. We can change this as adults. We are the system. And then solutions. And solutions that are really focused also on the issue of race. A friend of mine, and maybe others coined this phrase, but recently said we can't have race-neutral solutions for race-based problems. And so I would really like to hear a conversation about race and about solutions that are very explicit and clear around doing something different for students of color. I'll leave you with one kind of final example of data, just a proof point. So if you look at downtown Charleston, right, and you look at predominantly black elementary schools, for example, Sanders-Clyde. Right. Sanders-Clyde, the proficiency rate last year in 3rd grade English language arts was 1.6. And so you're talking about 1 in 50 students at Sanders-Clyde reading on grade level by 3rd grade. And there's a lot of research on if you can't read by 3rd grade, what that means for your life outcomes. And it's devastating. And so 1 in 50 precious, brilliant students at Sanders-Clyde are reading on grade level in 3rd grade. If you go over to Charleston Development Academy, right, also predominantly black school, 52% of their 3rd graders are meeting or exceeding expectations and are on grade level. And so the majority of their students, and these students look similar. These students have the same capacity inherently in their minds. They have the same capacity to learn. And so in one school, you have the majority of students on grade level. In another school, you have 1 in 50. And so the proof is all around us. You know, you go in classrooms and you can see it. Teachers working with urgency and in a way that is founded on an inherent belief that every single student in front of them, students of color, doesn't matter their circumstances, their background, can learn, must learn, and that the teacher, through his or her techniques, can really bring that learning out in students. And we've got examples right here on the peninsula where you see a huge difference in outcomes. So I would say let's build on that. Let's build on those positives. Let's look at those classrooms where teachers are getting a dramatically different result. They're all around us, and we can build on those great examples.
Elliot Smalley, thank you so much for your time. I really, really appreciate this.
Thank you, Quintin. I've been waiting to meet you, and I really
Yes, sir.
appreciate it.
Anytime.
All right. Thank
Yes,
you.
sir. Yeah.